Hey fight fans, before I get into this, please give the video a like. Please also subscribe to the channel, it will be greatly appreciated. But let's get into this. I'm going to react to the PFL rankings. Now these PFL rankings have been around for a few months since the PFL changed its strategy from being a tournament based promotion to what I would consider to be a normal mixed martial arts promotion where they promote the best fights and they have champions who defend those championships and they have contenders who fight other contenders to determine who actually gets the next title shot. And that's where these rankings come into play. Similar to the UFC and other promotions, you've got your number one, your number two, your number three rankings, and those contenders typically are going to be the most likely to get the next title shot. And then the guys further down need to work their way up to become closer to being number one contender. The PFL is going to have its most important month in its history in July 2026. They have several cards headlined by title fights, and I think a lot is at stake for the promotion as it goes forward. Do check out the video that I made about this in more detail. I'll add a link in the description for you to find. But let's get into these rankings to see what they're looking like. I haven't seen the PFL rankings in probably, I would say 2 months. So I'm interested to see how they currently look. And I'll start on the left-hand side, which is their pound-for-pound rankings for the men's division. Usman Nurmagomedov number one doesn't surprise me. He probably is their biggest star. He's very good, to be fair, but I think when you've got the surname Nurmagomedov, you obviously have a lot of hype in this sport. But to be fair, he's undefeated. He's been champion in Bellator, now champion in PFL. I think he's justifying that hype. And he's got one more fight left on his contract until he potentially considers what's next. Does that involve re-signing, or does that mean going to the UFC? It remains to be seen. Okay, Corey Anderson number two, Vadim Nemkov number three. Now that catches my eye because both guys are champions in their respective divisions. But Nemkov, who was previously fighting at light heavyweight, where Anderson is champion, actually holds a win over Anderson. And since then, he's moved up to heavyweight, became PFL champion. So I'm interested as to what the logic could be for the PFL pulling Anderson above Nemkov. I don't personally agree with that. Van Steen is number four. I think that makes sense. You know, some of these divisions don't have champions, but middleweight does have a champion, and that champion is Van Steenis. So I think that kind of maybe bumps him up a bit higher than what he would be otherwise. But to be fair, you know, he's been in one of the most memorable fights in the PFL's history, which was the win over Johnny Eblen against the run of play, where he submitted him in the very dying seconds of the fifth round after what looked like it was going to be a comfortable win for Johnny Eblen, who himself is number six. I do think Johnny Eblen will eventually take that belt. He's got the interim title fight against Impa Kasanganay, but I think he'll probably be undisputed middleweight champion at some point soon, and he'll climb up those rankings. But it's interesting to see Van Steen is so high at the moment. I think the rest of the guys, you know, in these rankings probably are, you know, looking to get their title as well. Some kind of high-profile names. AJ McKee, of course, very well known in Bellator. Thad Jean, a real prospect. He's filing Shamil Maziev for the vacant welterweight championship. So I think one of those two guys will probably stay or even move up in these rankings. I think the top 10 probably makes a lot of sense. I can't really think from the top of my head who's missing in that top 10. I say top 10, actually, there's only 9 fighters. So they haven't maximized the full top 10. So I guess they probably feel that these are the only 9 guys who really are, you know, worthy of being in the pound for pound list, which is fair because I can't really think who else is missing. The only thing I would say is Anderson ahead of Nemkov is a bit of a dubious one for reasons which I mentioned. And then moving on to the bantamweight division, which is one of the divisions without a champion. I think Sergio Pettis being number one is quite fortunate because he recently lost to Mitch McKee. And whilst Pettis was on a very good run going into that fight, I think typically in other promotions like the UFC, for example, if you lose a fight, the guy who you lost to typically will go above you. So you could argue Mitch McKee should be number one. I think the rest of these rankings, I would say no real surprises. I do think you could maybe suggest Taylor Lapalus is a bit higher, maybe number 3, number 2 if you're being really picky. I think he's somebody who the PFL, at some point will probably give a title shot to. A lot of people maybe underestimate him. He's formerly been in the UFC and done fairly well, to be fair. Like, he was never a top UFC bantamweight, but he never really got an opportunity against top competition. But he held his ground in the UFC, so I think he could do a decent job against most of the guys in the PFL's bantamweight division. I'm interested to see how he does. You could argue maybe it could be a bit higher, but other than that, I think outside of that top 4, the rest of those fighters maybe have a bit of a point to prove. It's been a while since we've seen Rafael Stotts win a fight. I think probably his prime years were back in Bellator. Masile Alves da Silva, very highly rated but lost recently. I think he's another one to keep an eye on. Maybe is another fight away from getting back into that top 5 where he can be a contender again. And then I think, admittedly, a couple of these guys I wouldn't say I know too much about, so it'll be interesting to see how some of these guys continue to evolve up these rankings. And then featherweight, which is another division without a champion. So we're yet to crown a featherweight champion in the PFL. Number 1 ranked is Timur Kizriev. Very highly rated fighter, undefeated, was shot in a very unfortunate circumstance back in 2024 and hasn't fought since, which is understandable. But I think if you're taking what he's been able to do up until that point in his career, he probably is a very worthy number 1. However, based on activity, you could argue AJ McKee should actually be number 1. AJ McKee has only lost 1 fight in the featherweight division in his career. His only other loss came at lightweight. So aside from Patricio Pitbull, no one's actually beat AJ McKee in featherweight, and he's not lost at featherweight in the PFL. So I think him being at number 2, is, I wouldn't say like it's a bad ranking by any means, but you could argue he should be at number 1. The guy he beat, Salamat Isbelayev, I think he's got a lot of potential in this division. It'll be interesting to see how he bounces back, but I think he probably is holding a reasonable number 4 spot given his loss. And then a couple of these other guys. I think there's a few names here which you want to keep tabs on and see what happens. We're hearing quite a lot about a couple of these fighters. The one that really stands out here is Adam Borix, because he lost not too long ago against AJ McKee, but up until that point, I think he was probably someone who you would have thrown in the top 5. I can't remember where he was exactly before that fight, but I'm guessing he would have been in the top 5. So it's interesting to see that he's dropped down a few places. Still a very young fighter, very explosive and good to watch. I'm interested to watch his fights when they occur. And moving on to lightweights, we mentioned Nurmagomedov is the number 1 in the pound-for-pound rankings. Obviously the champion. There's some really interesting names in this division, but the thing is, Nurmagomedov is going to defend his title next against Archie Colgan, who's ranked number 3, which makes sense, and I do think Colgan is a valid contender. He's undefeated. Nurmagomedov is undefeated. Somebody is losing that undefeated streak, so that will be fascinating. But then you look at some of these other fighters. Nurmagomedov has beat them. He's beaten number 2 Alfie Davis. He's beat number 4 Alexander Shabili. He's beaten number 5 Paul Hughes on 2 occasions. Interestingly, ranked number 1 Rabadonov is a good friend of Nurmagomedov. He's very close in that sort of Dagestan unit, so I don't know if there will ever be a fight between the two for, that friendship that they have. And also, as mentioned, Nurmagomedov only has 1 fight left on his current PFL deal. This could be his last fight against Colgan. Regardless if Nurmagomedov sticks around or not, I think it would be nice to see some of those fighters ranked from outside the top 5, go on a bit of a winning run and hopefully become good contenders. I like JJ Wilson. I think he's someone who always entertains when he fights. I think he's got another fight booked. I can't remember who he's fighting exactly, but he's someone who I really like. So, if he can put together another 1 or 2 wins, potentially he's in with a title shot against whoever the champion will be back then. But I think there is a possibility and a high possibility that, one of the names in the top 5, with the exception of Colgan, will be fighting for a vacant championship. Archie Colgan will get that title shot, but if he loses, you're probably then thinking, could you maybe do Rabadanov versus Alexander Shebelai, who recently beat Alfie Davis? That possibly means you get a second Russian lightweight champion in this division. And then at welterweight, Another vacant championship in this division. Interestingly, there was recently a champion in this division in Ramazan Nurmagomedov. He vacated the championship to retire. So we're going to have Shamil Muziev versus Fadjin, number 1 versus number 2, to determine the new champion. And I think the rest of this division probably doesn't surprise me too much. I wouldn't say there's any kind of ordering in these rankings which are concerning or alarming. I think this is a division which is very interesting. I mean, we talk about the UFC's welterweight division being stacked, but this one is as well. There's a lot of guys in this division who I have some really high hopes for. A lot of them are maybe more prospects than sort of firm contenders. So looking at someone like Patrick Habarura, he's someone who is really building a big name for himself, undefeated, and he got a big name win over Benson Henderson. And look, admittedly, this is the Benson Henderson who, isn't the same as what he once was in the UFC, but that's still a big name victory for him, which puts everybody else on notice. I think that's a good name for his CV. And I'm glad to see Cedric Doumbé in the top 10. He's been very inactive. I think his last fight was back in 2024. I want to see this guy fight soon. I want to see this guy fight, and I would love to see him fight a few of these guys. I think Cedric Doumbé versus Patrick Habarura or Fadjin would be fantastic. But in terms of him getting up those rankings, he obviously has a bit of work to do. I think him being top 10 is fair because he's been inactive. And the other guys, in this division are very good as well. So that's a very interesting division to look at. Middleweight's also interesting. So Costello Van Steenis is the champion. There will be an interim championship fight between number 1 Johnny Eblen and number 3 Impa Kasanganay. Unfortunately, Van Steenis injured himself, so he can't defend the championship against Eblen as planned. I think that was going to take place at the PFL Austin card this month. So that's a bit of a shame. But I think Eblen versus Kasanganay will be a good rematch. They had a previous fight which was very close and Eblen came out on top. So that will be another big test for Eblen, who obviously is still trying to, redeem himself after losing the title fight against Van Steenis in very dramatic fashion with a late submission. But then the rest of this division, I think Fabian Edwards, to be fair, is probably quite fortunate to be number 2, because you can probably say Kasanganay, after beating Dawson Roster, should be number 2. And it might not make a big deal in the grand scheme of things because Kasanganay is getting an interim title shot. Edwards is already, maybe out of the title picture as of now, given that he recently lost an undisputed title fight against Van Steenis. But I think if you're being petty, probably Kasanganay should be number 2. And then, I think a couple of these other guys are still up and coming. Boris Atangana, he's a really interesting name who seems to be doing really well. I think another 1 or 2 wins for him potentially gets him a title fight. I think maybe one more win, kind of against a big name would be a big push in the right direction. But then if he gets a win against one of the guys above him, you're probably looking at another title contender. And then you got some real gatekeepers. I kind of feel guys like Aaron Jeffrey, who we've spoken about for a while since the Bellator days, probably will be a good mainstay in this division, but I'm not sure if he'll ever be champion. Brian Ballo at number 8, very notable name from the UFC who, has come over to the PFL, lost his debut fight against Johnny Eblen. It will be interesting to see how Brian Battle, who is still at a very good age, I think he's in his early 30s, it will be interesting to see how far he can go in this division, because I do think it's quite a competitive division, but also he's fought good competition in the UFC before. Like, he's not fought the very best middleweights in the UFC, but he's come with big fight experience, fighting guys outside of the top 15 who are still quite notable in the UFC. So it'll be interesting to see if he can get in title contention. And then the light heavyweight division. So Corey Anderson's clearly the champion, as we know. Number 1, Antonio Carlos Jr. is going to face Luke Trainer, who's number 3 at some point soon. That will be what I imagine is a title eliminator, if you like. And then the rest of this division, I think that ordering is quite fair, to be honest. I don't think there's anything there that really surprises me. What I would like to see in this division is a bit more activity. I think a few of these guys could do with having a fight. I used to like Sullivan Corley in Bellator, and I say I used to. Like, I don't dislike him now, but I can't remember when he last fought. It would be nice to see him be a bit more active and see what he can do in this division, because he was somebody who, in Bellator, I think was looking like a real prospect. So it'll be nice to see him get in the cage and fight at some point soon. And then heavyweight. Vadim Nemkov is a very worthy champion. He's got some real competition against 1, 2, and 3 fellow Russian fighters who are gunning for him in this division. Um, I would like to see some new contenders in this division. I personally don't like it when a division is clogged up with guys from the same country. I would like to see a bit more diversity in this division because I think that also brings together a different range of personalities and a different range of skills. We know that mixed martial arts is in some ways very cultural depending on where people learn the trait from. What I find interesting about this division is Linton Vassell is no longer in the top 10. And in fact, the top 10 places are not actually fully maximized. We've got 1 to 8 as opposed to 1 to 10. So presumably the PFL have decided that there isn't a need for a 9th or 10th fighter to be ranked because no one's really cutting the mustard at the moment. But Linton Vassell, won his last fight and he's not ranked in the top 10 anymore. So he's been taken out. So presumably, does that mean Linton Vassell is no longer with the PFL? I don't know. There's been no announcement about that as far as I can tell. But that will be a big shame because even though he's coming to the end of his career, I think you still could have got 1 or 2 decent fights out of him. And then what I find interesting is the women's featherweight division doesn't have any rankings, even though there's a champion in Chris Cyborg. So we've got the women's flyweight division, which doesn't have a champion. Dakota Ditcheva, number 1, probably the biggest star in the PFL's women's division, possibly even the whole of the women's mixed martial arts scene as a whole. She's going to fight Liz Carmouche at some point soon for that flyweight strap. I know she has another fight coming up soon, which I think if she wins will lead to her getting a title shot against Liz Carmouche. But that's a fight that I think the PFL do need to make sooner rather than later. And then I think there's some decent fighters in here. I've seen a few fights from the likes of Taylor Santos, Polina, Winch as well. She's someone who I've seen a few times. Denise Calhoots is also a fighter I'm aware of from the Bellator days. I think this is a decent division. Again, I'm not sure if there's any big fights in this division planned apart from the Dakota Ditcheva fight. And to be honest, I'm not even sure who Ditcheva is fighting. I can't remember. I'm guessing it's one of the people on this list, but I can't remember from the top of my head. But it'll be good to really get a champion booked in this division and a champion booked in some of the other divisions where we don't have any current champions, because I think that will just drive up activity and then you can start to really think who are the real contenders to face that person who's champion. So hopefully we do get a bantamweight champion, a featherweight champion, and a women's flyweight champion, as well as a welterweight champion as well. I think we need a new welterweight champion since Nurmagomedov retired. But no, that's the PFL rankings. I mean, there's no massive controversies or surprises here, but I think there's 1 or 2 petty things I would say for a couple divisions. But that's my reaction to these PFL rankings. I'm interested to see what the PFL can do in July 2026. Do check out the video I put in the description, which reflects on what will be the PFL's biggest month in their entire history. I preview some of these big fights and some of these big cards. In the meantime, let me know what you think about the rankings. Do you agree with anything? Do you disagree with anything? Any surprises? Thank you for watching. Until next time.